Okay. Thank you to everyone for attending the Community Foundation's virtual meeting tonight. And as always, we appreciate your patience if we have any technical hiccups. A couple of technical items before we get to the content of tonight's meeting. On September 16, 2021, the Governor of California signed AB 361 suspending certain provisions of the Ralph M. Brown Act in order to allow for local legislative bodies to conduct their meetings telephonically or by other electronic means. To reduce the spread of COVID-19, meetings of the San Bruno Community Foundation's Board of Directors are being conducted electronically. Please know that we want to hear from you. If you are in the audience and you would like to address the board during public comment for items not on the agenda or on any of the agendized items, please use the raise your hand button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Once you raise your hand, the executive director will see that someone wants to talk and she will let me know that you are waiting. When it is your turn to speak, the executive director will call your name. She will unmute you and you will be given 3 minutes to address the board. If you are joining us by phone, you may also address the board during public comment by pressing *9. The executive director will address you and unmute you. You will also be given 3 minutes to address the board. Please note anyone in attendance may only speak once per agenda item. Were there any emails from the public related to the agenda? Okay, great. So let's begin the meeting. Item number 1, I call to order. I now call the special meeting of the San Bruno Community Foundation's Board of Directors of January 30th, 2023 to order. Before we begin, I want to give a word of support to our neighbors in Half Moon Bay. San Bruno knows firsthand the power of community support at a time of deep tragedy. Just as San Bruno felt the outpouring of support from throughout the Bay Area in response to the 2010 gas pipeline explosion in our city, we now have the opportunity to support our neighbors on the coast side who are reeling from this week's senseless mass shooting in Half Moon Bay, as well as the severe impacts on the farm working community resulting in the recent flooding. Half Moon Bay, we stand with you at this time of loss and struggle. I'll now turn the time over to Raul for item number 2. Secretary Gomez, please roll call.
Thank you. Board Member Irving Torres.
Here.
Board Member Cypria Perry.
Present.
Board Member Melissa Moreno.
Here.
Treasurer Pac Lynn.
Here.
Raul Gomez is here. Vice President Jim Ruane.
Here.
President Melissa Natani Jones.
Here.
All present.
Thank you so much, Secretary Gomez. Item number 3, public comment. Would any members of the public like to address the board on a topic not on the agenda? If so, please indicate by using the raise your hand button at the bottom of the Zoom screen.
There are no hands raised.
Okay. Okay, so I will turn the time over. We're on now item number 4, study session, diversity, equity, and inclusion training led by Yana Kaiser and Bella Bassin of Libertiva. A year ago, during the board study session on roles and responsibilities and operating norms of the Board of Directors, the board discussed the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, training, and agreed to have the new board members participate in the self-assessment and individual meetings with the DEI consultant in which board members participated in 2021, and to have the board engage in at least one DEI discussion each year. With the retirement of our previous DEI consultant, Leslie and I brought on Yana Kaiser of Libertiva to support the foundation's DEI efforts. These DEI trainings are a two-part effort. First, in December and January, Yana has conducted 2-hour individual assessments, training, reflection sessions with the 4 directors who joined the board in 2022 and the new program manager, focusing on the examination and transformation of internal biases, learnings that result in everyday acts of bigotry, and the adoption of practices that promote DEI. As part of these individualized trainings, Yana is utilizing a DEI self-assessment tool developed at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. The second part of this effort is tonight's full board study session, to which I'm greatly looking forward to. Our training tonight will be jointly led by Yana and her colleague, Bella Basim. This session will focus on impact bias, what it is, how it works, why it matters, how we can counteract it, and how it affects our work at the foundation. I hope you were able to look at the preparatory materials for this session and watch the assigned video and read the assigned article before the meeting. We had to reschedule this session after a wicked storm left our consultants without power and unable to log into our last meeting. And we're fortunate to have better weather forecast for this evening, even though it's a little cold. So thank you to everyone for agreeing to schedule this special meeting so that we can have this study session. I'll now turn the time over to Yana and Bella.
Good evening, everyone. And again, thank you both for having us tonight and for your flexibility in rescheduling. It was certainly an intense time a few weeks ago, so I hope that you all made it through the storm safely in your property and homes and streets, and immediate communities are recovering from that big storm. And Bayla and I are really just delighted to be here on behalf of our organization, Libertiva, and in partnership with you in the San Bruno Community Foundation. So we're happy to be here tonight, grateful to get to reschedule, and we'll dive in. The plan is to have a 2-hour workshop, so we'll stay to the minute to that commitment. And we also will have a small break in between to kind of mid-session in case you need to get a drink of water or go to the bathroom or something along that line. And with that, we'll just dive in. And Bayla's going to be sharing her screen. So appreciate that, Bayla. Thank you. And we'll go to the next slide, please. Great. And so Bayla and I always like to begin workshops centered on equity with a land acknowledgement, knowing that the land that we are on is unceded land in many ways. And so we'd like to acknowledge in this moment the land that is today known as San Bruno and the Bay Area as a whole. Many of us are virtually in this meeting and physically in San Bruno, and some of us are in other spots in the Bay Area. There is a website here in the chat that you could access perhaps at a later time if you'd like, but it's a handy tool to note and to learn about the land that we are on, who the stewards were and are. For example, here in Oakland, I am on Ohlone land. And so I just want to take a moment both to recognize that and to appreciate the ancestors, both known and unknown, who helped steward forward the land that we live in and on. And also we are gathered here in service of San Bruno. And so I want to also honor the Ohlone people and the Ramaytush people in particular who are on the peninsula, who are still present, are organizing in a variety of different ways to steward and to take care of the land through land tax and environmental projects and more. So I want to really acknowledge that we are in community and in service to what is today known as San Bruno, and in gratitude to those who helped get us to this space. And also, we want to acknowledge that so we're going to be talking about bias and racism and other aspects of equity, and we recognize that this can be a tough thing to do sometimes. It's hard for us sometimes to revisit topics that have been painful and hurtful in the past. Oppression has affected all of us in various ways, and often we're holding that stress in our bodies and in our nervous systems. And so we'd also like to take a moment here at the very beginning to really practice a tool that we could use throughout the session. And it's quite a simple one. If we're starting to notice that our heart rates are going up, or that we're feeling some physical sensation of stress, maybe some tension in the chest, or a bit of holding in the abdomen, maybe we start to notice some tension in our jaw or holding our hands, etc. If we start to feel some urgency of some sort or some other physical signal of stress, it can often be helpful just to take a moment to take a long exhale, to breathe a little bit. And so I invite you to try that with me now. Perhaps just taking in a deep breath through your nose and a long, slow exhale, just knowing that it's actually on the exhale that our nervous systems get the cue. It's safe enough right now. It's safe enough to rest and digest and really fully engage our higher order thinking, get out of threat response. And so I can invite you to take a deep breath and a really long, slow exhale, this time intentionally relaxing some part of the body. So perhaps relaxing your jaw. Maybe as you breathe out, relaxing your shoulders, allowing some acknowledgement of your feet being supported, or your hips or your lower back. Just on a most micro level, allowing your body to settle into the support and the steadiness and stability that's present. And sometimes with this tool, it's actually helpful to say the words. So as we breathe in, just inviting yourself to breathe and noting breathe, just kind of as an invitation to yourself. Breathing in, long, slow exhale. And on the exhale, just saying quietly, or even just silently to yourself, just the word relax, just allowing the body to relax on a micro level. And the last step here can be really helpful to conversation. And that's an intentional opening. So this could just be an actual physical opening of bringing back your shoulders a little bit and opening your chest, allowing for your eyes to drop a little bit and your face to open in expression. It could be to open up your palms, which is actually opening the body and giving this idea that we're opening with curiosity, we're opening to learn with each other, we're opening to listen. And so again, this is a very simple tool to breathe, especially a long exhale, relax a part of the body and open, that we could return to at any time. And so just want to name again that with this resiliency piece is a really important part to the work that we'll be doing, and feel free during the break or at any time to just revisit this tool. And we'll also, excuse me for using the chat in this meeting, we won't do that, but I can just say out loud the website that I put into the chat so that it is open to the public as well. And that's basically to go to native-land.ca. And that's a great tool, www.native-land.ca, to learn a little bit about the Indigenous communities on the lands that we're on. We'll pass into the next slide, please. And in this slide, we just really would like to very formally welcome board members and staff, anybody who is from the public in the San Bruno community or elsewhere who are signing in. And we recognize that we are coming in with roles and also all sorts of identity. And so Bela and I warmly welcome participants and those present here today of African, Asian, Arab, Middle Eastern, and European descent. Those who identify as Hispanic, Latinx, Latine, Black, White, Indigenous, Native, biracial, and people of multiple races and ethnicities.
And we welcome participants from different faiths, religious traditions, spiritual beliefs, private practices not belonging to a tradition, agnostics, atheists, and seekers. We welcome those of you with disabilities, visible or invisible.
We welcome those who identify as single, dating, partnered, married, separated, divorced, or widowed. We welcome participants of all sexual orientations, preferences, and gender identities.
And we welcome those of you who identify as parents, step-parents, foster parents, godparents, guardians, caretakers, sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles, doctors, doctors also, daughters, sons, nieces, nephews, cousins, grandmothers, grandfathers, granddaughters, grandsons, and our colleagues who have been adopted or have been adopted.
And we also welcome all who have identities that were unnamed, knowing that there are all different aspects of us. And so we just welcome you in your full humanity and grateful that you're here today. And Bela and I would also like to introduce ourselves here. Melissa, thank you for that warm introduction at the beginning. Again, we're coming from an organization that's called Libertiva. On some of our slides and some of the materials, it was JK, it's named as JK Consulting. That's how we operated before. So it's a new name switch for us. So we invite you into our organization. We are working with some certain lenses and pillars in this equity work. And so Bela and I are both moving with an anti-racist approach. We come from countries that have been colonized. I was born in Puerto Rico and spent my early childhood there. Bela grew up in India, and this connection and life experience in places that have been colonized also informed a very anti-colonialist view that infuses some of the work that we do. We really believe that we can heal from the effects of oppression, both individually, interpersonally, systemically, and community level, and globally even. And we believe that in that healing, we really need to address that the effects of oppression, poverty, and racism and other bigotry are certainly held in the body. They're held epigenetically within us. They are held in our nervous systems. They're held in our threat responses and more. And so we take a body-centered approach in this workshop. It's going to be a real light touch, but in other aspects of our work, we really focus on that piece and build resiliency. We also really believe in collective liberation, this concept that to do this work, it's actually helpful for everyone. And there's this possibility of true liberty in a variety of different ways and true freedom. We know that those who have been most impacted in a variety of ways also have the solutions of how change could come. So we believe in community rootedness and a grassroots approach, person to person, human to human. We know that this work takes something. It takes courage and bravery and willingness and effort. So we applaud you for joining us tonight. Thank you again for the invitation. And we aim to partner with you in that way in courageous conversation. And we really think that this work needs to build on bright spots. We build on strength. We build on what's going right, in addition to really acknowledging impact and what needs to change. We're both educators and have a real global perspective, both in where we've worked, where we've lived, how our families are compiled and composed. And so we bring that lens too, that we're looking from our perspective as current citizens of California and residents here, and also, from our global experience as well. And so that's Bela. Anything else? Bela and I decided that I would introduce this on behalf of both of us, but also feel free to chime in here, Bela, if there's something I missed.
You did great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. And we want to share a little bit. We also know that when we talk about being body-centered, it's helpful for people in the room to know what are we up to together today in this time that we have in the next 2 hours. So we wanted to share with you how we have broken up this time that we are going to spend with you. And so we want to start out. So the topic for today is, as was mentioned earlier, was implicit bias and privilege, right? And so we want to start out by talking about what is implicit bias. We want to share some brain science behind it. What are the key processes? What's happening in our brains that allows implicit bias to happen? Because we all have it. And then we'll also talk a little bit about why it matters. And then we'll take a short break. And when we come back from break, we want to talk about this idea of unearned advantage and unearned disadvantage. And then we'll close out our session with talking about this idea of growth mindset and how we can counteract implicit bias, which is also based on some science around, yes, we all have them. What can we do about it? And throughout the session, we'll pause so that we can give you some space to reflect on your own experience, both as individuals and collectively as an organization, because that's important to do. And we also make sure that in our sessions we hold some agreements. We call them brave agreements. This notion that this work requires us to lean into what we call fierce vulnerability or courageous vulnerability, right? That's how we learn. That's how we interrupt these biases in ourselves, is because it actually requires us to take some risks and be vulnerable. So just wanted to share these with you. We'll give you a moment to review these, and if not required, but if you want to unmute and add something to the space, you're welcome to do that, but there's no pressure to do that. We just want to bring these to you. So just take a moment to review these. If you have any questions, you want to add anything, we welcome that. And it's really, again, this idea that when we are talking about what Jana was saying earlier, when we are talking about oppression, when we are talking about racism, that we need some agreements in the space of how are we going to be together in this space. And these are just some reminders for us. These are things that we hold in all of our spaces that Jana and I are in together. So we wanted to bring those to you. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Jana to get us started.
Great. And thank you, Bela. And Melissa, thank you here for adding
yes.
that, the idea of always carrying the idea of do no harm. Yes, indeed. Yeah. And Bela, maybe if we can go back just one slide back to the group agreements.
Yeah.
Connected to this piece of harm is also that sometimes we might, without meaning to, cause harm, right? When we, in speech or in action. And so this number 4 of really understanding the difference between intent and impact can be helpful. So thank you for acknowledging both the intent to not do harm, and also just add an and there, that there's room also in this conversation that if harm is caused and we gain awareness about that we have room to clean it up and really focus on intent. We could support that process. Thank you. I'll also want to just say too, as we're thinking about brave agreements, if anyone needs any accessibility support, feel free to speak up. Leslie, I'm not sure if that's something that could be chatted more privately or not, but we can certainly will gladly receive that. And so if we're talking too fast, talking too slow, we'd like to make something more visual, etc., please just let us know. And then the other piece is that in your board materials, you also received a packet of information that is designed to help. It's the pre-packet document that is actually designed to be a tool for you to use if you'd like to take notes around some of the content that we're knowledge content, like the terms and some of the concepts, and then so there's room to write takeaways and reflections, and then also some space there to build your own definitions as well. And then also just like a space for you to write a reflection log more openly. So if that's part of your learning style, please feel free to use those materials, and we'll reference them lately. Yeah, thank you. And now yeah. Okay, great. And so we'll jump into this portion. Thank you, Bela, for outlining this for us, that of what is implicit bias. That's one of our key topics today. And then what are the related brain processes, and why does this matter in our work? And this does build on, as Melissa mentioned at the very beginning, I have had the opportunity to work with some of you who are newer to the board, and also with Jessica, who's a newer staff member. We were able to do 5 individual sessions that were centered on microaggressions. And this content, I hope, will reinforce some of the work that we did individually as well. And so let's jump in. We'll focus on what is implicit bias. And so as you hear these words, implicit bias, I invite you to think about what comes to mind. What are, and we might have a lot of fluency with this term, implicit bias, or for some of us, it might be relatively new. And so you're welcome to just think about what comes to mind from your past experience and in the concept itself, or you could just take a guess of what is implicit bias, what might it mean if it's newer to you. And so we'll just take a 30 seconds or so here just to tune in what comes to mind for you. And then also we'll open it up in case there's someone who would like to share of what comes to mind for you. Again, zero pressure, but just invite you to share if you'd like to. We have time for perhaps 2 or even 3 people to share what comes to mind for you when you think about implicit bias.
I can go.
Please.
So what comes up for me is my experiences, my background, things that I've learned, and just kind of how all of that creates thoughts and perspectives about others, which are not always positive, but they could be also negative. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I think about when I hear implicit bias.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you. Anyone else have an idea of what comes to mind for you with implicit bias? Again, no pressure.
I can go.
Please.
I think of your secret judging part of your brain where we make judgments about others sometimes without even knowing. And for me, in my workplace, this is really important to counter. And so when I see implicit bias, I immediately think about the topic of hiring people, making sure we're keeping bias out of the hiring process.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Well, let's jump into a little video clip here to go deeper into what it is. What is implicit bias? I think Bela's trying to run it for us.
You're about to meet Michael. He lives fast as a self-made millionaire.
You didn't have to dress up. It's all right.
You're going to photograph Michael. He's actually saved somebody's life. Michael is an ex-inmate. He's a commercial fisherman. Michael claims to be psychic.
Nice to meet you.
Michael's a former alcoholic. Here's your camera. I would like you to flesh out the essence of who he is.
What would you like out of this? What would you like the photograph to say about you? Do you find that being a psychic impacts much on your day-to-day life?
I can see this is emotional for you.
Like to get to know the person.
You've only got 10 minutes, right?
I think you're a guy that's put yourself out there. You're not hiding anything. My plan was to find out about whoever it was and to try and get that. And what I learned from him is he's incredibly brave.
It was really intense. Pull this shirt out. Sorry.
I wanted to see the nature of the person, which then present a challenge. How do you portray him as a fisherman?
That's perfect.
He's a self-made millionaire and sort of a little bit intimidating. I wasn't going for a beautiful, nice, perfectly lit portrait.
I just want to try bring out something of who you are. I think that you just treat people like the everyday people, like everybody is.
Pleasure. Thank
you.
you so much.
Well, I hope I've got that guy's bravery on film.
So it was a very intimidating environment.
So you work.
I like the empty chair next to it too.
Like, he's just a totally different person.
Almost looks like 6 different people. So not everything I told you today was true. I'm not a fisherman. I am not an alcoholic. The GFC hit me hard, but I've never been a millionaire. Never been in prison. I am a Bondi lifesaver, but the story we talked about never did happen. Not psychic. Can barely spell it.
Before I knew there were different characters in each of these, I thought, that's really strange. These don't look like portraits of the character I thought you were. You always got your own preconceptions and you've got your ideas.
It pushed me into a position and a space that I wouldn't normally be in.
You have to dig a lot deeper. It means you've got to be, I think you're a lot more creative to work out how you're going to play things.
So we're hoping that that video can also, to some extent, illuminate some of this perspective too, from Brenna Myers, who says that biases are the stories that we make up about people before we actually know who they are. And sometimes those stories are informed. You know, somebody tells us a little bit about someone. This is their, like in the video, this is the person's job, or here's a little bit about their history. And sometimes we're making up the stories based on what they look like. Sometimes we're making up stories based on our experiences of people that sound like that person and more, right? But these ideas that, and so we're going to go deeper into the science behind this, but this is one version of a definition about bias, is that it's the stories that we make up. We'll go to the next slide, please. And so now we'll also bump in, or we'll start here with one other short video. This is just a little clip of a longer portion of a talk. And so actually in the board packet, there's a link that you can go and watch the whole thing if you'd like. So we'll just watch a few minutes. But this is from a professor who worked at UCLA. He was the founding vice chancellor of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And he was also a law professor and an Asian American studies professor too. So his name is Jerry Kang, and we'll hear a bit of his perspective about implicit bias.
So I'm going to start with an impolite question. Do you discriminate on the basis of race, gender, sexual orientation? I mean, if you were the identical TED Talk, but coming from a white guy, would you like it better? Of course not. Why would you do that? We all remember the dream. We remember what Martin Luther King Jr. taught us, right? He said we're supposed to judge people by the content of character, not the color of skin. You judge people only on the merits and nothing else. We're colorblind. But are you so sure? So it turns out actually some people actually are literally colorblind, so they can't see that tile A is much darker than tile B, but most of us actually can see that. But it's actually an illusion. Just like a smartphone camera does autofocus and autocorrect, it turns out our brains do the same thing constantly. And when we do so, we usually get things right, but sometimes the shadows and the compensation for actual contrast effects gets things wrong. It's this understanding that maybe our brains are like our powerful smartphone cameras that could actually tell us a lot about how things actually work. So think about it. The real world confronts you at a brutal pace in real time. You can't but engage in automatic processing. So when I came out on the stage, what did your brains do? You auto-focused on my face, you did some face recognition, and you immediately hashtagged me with multiple categories: male, middle-aged, professional, Asian. And then you stored that data in a mental cloud that you keep up here with all the other things that you have stored and hashtagged as Asian over the course of your entire lives. Now, a social psychologist would describe that mental cloud in terms of attitudes and stereotypes. Attitudes are like gut feelings, emotional valences of positive versus negative, like versus dislike, hot versus not, thumbs up versus thumbs down. By contrast, stereotypes are like traits that you associate with the category. So you already know I'm a professional, I'm a law professor. Once you put me into the category of Asian, you might be thinking, more likely than not that he got a perfect score on his math SAT. I'm Asian. More likely than not that I have a second-degree black belt in some ancient East Asian martial art. More likely than not that I was raised by a tiger mom who forced me to practice, not cello, but violin 6 hours a day, such that I performed at Carnegie Hall at the age of 16. 2 out of those 3 are actually true. Decades of research have told us that actually these attitudes and these stereotypes influence how you see me and how you behave. So if I want to know whether you discriminate, I actually have to get access to that mental cloud. I have to know what the junk is inside your head. Now, one way to do that is for me to just sidle up to you and ask, like, on average, sir, are African Americans more violent and criminal than white folks? On average, ma'am, do you think that...
So again, this is just a little clip of this. We're hoping just to whet your appetite, and perhaps you'd like to visit the whole thing. I'd also like to invite you to tune in a bit. Sometimes even just hearing these stereotypes or these biases said out loud can be uncomfortable. I know for me, every time I listen to this, there are parts of it that just make me a little bit tense. And so we'll skip to the next slide here and start to build in this concept of explicit and implicit bias. And, when on the explicit side, we're really aware of the biases. We're aware of the stories that we're telling ourselves. It's a conscious act. Often these biases, whether they're negative or positive, Melissa thanks at the beginning for saying that sometimes bias is positive, right? And sometimes it's negative. That these are expressed directly. So for example, if it was a negative bias and I'm aware of it, I might say out loud, I don't like and I don't trust Muslims. I might have this bias that I really recognize. I personally do. So I'm speaking of this in the abstract, but it could be that a person might be saying, I don't like and I don't trust Muslims. They have a different religion than me, and I'm aware of this opinion or bias, stereotype even that I have about Muslim people. Alternatively, implicit bias are biases that operate unconsciously, that we are unaware of, that are expressed indirectly. So this might be something that we are not, we might be acting out, but we are not aware that we are doing so. And so in this similar example, it would be about Muslims. It might be sitting farther away from a woman in a headscarf or hijab, just feeling some sense of discomfort, maybe even feeling some somatic or bodily sensation of distrust, but not having it be conscious, but having it play out in our actions. And we'll go to the next one, please. And so again, some of this is conscious and some of it is unconscious, or and the unconscious part of the mind is actually most of the minds. It's where most of the decision and many of the impressive acts of thinking, as David Brooks said in his book, The Social Animal, take place. So it's like this iceberg, that there's this bit of, we have capacity only for a certain number of conscious awareness thoughts. And the vast majority of the working of our mind is unconscious. We'll go to the next one, please. And so in this, conscious versus unconscious mind, there's kind of, I think, some pretty fascinating parts of bits of kind of knowledge stemming from our scientific knowledge of the brain. And one is that the unconscious mind is really fast. It sorts and processes an estimated 11 million pieces of information per second. And again, this is not conscious intake. It's actually just the unconscious mind sorting, processing, and taking it in without us even having thinking awareness about it. Go to the next bit here, where meanwhile, our conscious mind is more like taking a slow walk. It's processing an estimated of 40 pieces of information per second. So the difference between 11 million and 40 is obviously very dramatic. And again, it's because the vast majority of the working mind is unconscious. And so the speed of our unconscious mind helps us survive, right? It helps us manage threat. It helps us assess the safety of circumstances. It helps us make rapid fire decisions that affect how our social interactions play out and more. And so it helps us, and also is just a hotbed for potential unconscious bias that really affects our words, our speech, our action, and how we interact with others. Go to the next one. So I invite you to think here about some of the areas where bias could be activated. Click one more time, please, Bela. Thank you. And so this is, a little visual here about some of the areas where bias could be activated, like income or family. In our last example, it was related to religion. And there are others here in the visual, but this is certainly not an exhaustive list of ways where bias could be activated. And so invite you here just to reflect a bit, to think what other areas may bias be at play. And then if a few come to mind that you'd like to share with the group, you're welcome to share out. Happy to break the ice too with one that's not listed there that sometimes comes up, and that's something like gender expression or even scent, like how someone smells to us can certainly affect what the stories are that we make up about them. So Priya,
I was thinking, sorry.
Please. No, I just saw you go off mute. I wanted to invite you, please.
Environment too, like sometimes just the entire environment and your interaction with the person or people within it can influence.
Yes, absolutely. So not just the individual we're interacting with, but the context within which we're interacting with them. Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else want to offer maybe one more? What else might be an area where our bias might be activated or show up?
This is Pac. I remember in college, there was a big thing between whether you're born here or from afar.
Yeah, absolutely. So where you are from, and if you are born here, or you're born someplace else, absolutely. And many, many more, right? For sure. Jim, I just saw your hand.
Your day-to-day job, you go into work and all the things you experience. I mean, it's just, it takes in all of these. It takes in the culture, the appearance, all different kinds of things. So you really get hit during the day when you're working.
Absolutely. Yep. Both in that piece that Supriya was saying about the context that we're in, that workplace, and then also perhaps even someone's role, right? When we know their job, it can often activate biases that we have, whether they be positive or negative. Definitely. Thank you for that, Jim. So let's go into the next slide and think a bit about why this matters. So again, just to invite you to reflect, why does this matter? That that bias arises both consciously and unconsciously, sometimes negatively, sometimes positively. But why do you think that might affect our lives or other people's lives? Why does it matter? Feel free just to reflect or to talk about it if you'd like to.
I have an idea.
Please.
Well, I go back to in my own personal workplace environment, how important it is for our students to feel a sense of belonging and our employees to feel a sense of belonging. And so sometimes bias in the classroom or bias in the hiring process takes that away.
Yeah, absolutely. What a beautiful example also of how the institution, right, the college or the organization, the foundation, or we as individuals may have values. Like we believe that we want to create a context of belonging, right? We want to create a context of inclusion. And these biases can actually get in the way of our behavior being in alignment with that value, right? So a professor, a leader of the institution, a board member might have that value, but the biases again might interrupt how we talk, what our facial expressions are, how we physically welcome or don't welcome someone, and that really impacts their sense of belonging. And so our actions may not be in alignment with those values if we're not conscious or kind of work on these biases. Yes, absolutely. Maybe one more reason. Why does it matter?
I think people matter, and oftentimes our biases lead to action, and kind of like your agreements earlier, it's intent versus impact. And although we intend to be kind and thoughtful and mindful, our biases sometimes impact others differently.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And beautifully put. So also that idea that our intent, sometimes the biases actually get in the way of our intent being in alignment with our impact. Yes, absolutely. Bela, thank you for moving this slide. So, and I think we'll just hit them all, if you don't mind. So we'll just click through. So here are some other ways. This follows up on the article that we sent in advance as well. And so, this highlights some of these ways that even though we'd like to think of ourselves as exceptions, all of us have bias. And sometimes we are more biased than we actually realize. And so we, without meaning to, we might be contributing to injustice or to bigotry. And that can be happening on an individual level. Like, for example, there's research that shows that when people are seeing images of folks' faces, that sometimes we humans in the United States, especially from certain groups, perceive Black faces as angrier than white faces with the same expression. So same facial expression, same human expression, but the bias interrupts and makes up a story about African-American or Black faces being more angry. And then an example on an institutional level would be for example, hiring practices, that white applicants or those who have a white sounding name get more callbacks than people who don't have a white sounding name, or and also men often are called back more often than women. And this can be linked to the bias of those who are making the hiring decisions. So again, just a reference to the article. If you haven't had a chance to read it, it's there waiting for you. But there's a lot of data out that really underscores how impactful this can be, as Melissa's saying, on humans, right? And humans matter. Absolutely. So we'll skip to the next bit here.
Okay. Thank you, Yana. And thank you for all of you who have shared so far. We welcome all voices into the room. It tells us that a lot of this knowledge is already in the room. And we want to really talk a little bit about, so what's going on in our brain? right? How does implicit bias actually happen? The fact that we all have it, right? And so there are 3 key processes, and I think, Melissa, you touched upon a number of them, and I think a couple of you who also spoke shared some of these, but there are 3 key processes, and one is called priming. And we'll go over each one of these in more detail, but just want to share these first. So there's priming, there's the associations and the assumptions that we make as a result of the priming, and then there are our decisions and actions that Melissa just mentioned, right? And bias sits in the middle of priming and our actions and decisions, right? That whole piece that we all have these beliefs and values that we hold, and very often we may not be acting in alignment with them. And that's more often than not because the bias creeps in, right? So let's see how this happens then. The priming, we know, begins when we are infant, right? From the moment we are born, and it's through all these patterns and associations that we learn to make as a result of being a part of a community, a family, a community of friends. We pick up on things, right? And our brain is storing them away in that mental cloud, right? And so, for example, when I say the words peanut butter, what's the first thing most of us think of, right? And I will say most of us think of jelly, right? Even for somebody who didn't grow up here, right, in this country, I know that association, right? Because I've learned it as an adult, right? And so we are primed to make certain associations based on the messages that we have received throughout our lifetime, from the moment that we are born. And it's this idea, this neurons that fire together, wire together, right? This idea that the more we see 2 things associated together, the faster we learn, the more we see them to show up together, the faster we associate them with each other, right? And so as we get older, this priming that started when we were infants, and it was through messages through our families and communities, it also occurs through cultural messages that we are receiving through the media, right, through the institutions, the organizations that we are all a part of. And the thing is that if we have that strong an association with peanut butter and jelly, what associations might we make to images, other images that we are constantly being exposed to? So, for example, this one, right? What about this one? There's another. And there's hundreds, right? We picked some that we could fit on a slide. But what associations, as you look at these pictures, what associations are being primed for us through these images? What associations did you make with any of them the moment you saw it, right? What's the first thing that popped into your mind? If anybody wants to share, we'd love to hear. Is there something, the moment you saw an image and you were like, oh, and a thought popped into your mind? What was it? What was that first thought?
The Dolce and Gabbana is totally objectifying a woman.
Yeah, and that's only one of thousands, right? That we see, that we internalize as women as well, right? What do you notice about the, sorry, go for it.
All United States presidents are white men.
Except there's one picture there, right? Of President Obama. And you can see it's hard to even see that, right? In a sea of white men. Yeah. Yeah. And so as Professor Kang was shared in that little video clip that we saw, that all of these messages, the information that we are receiving throughout our lifetime, it gets stored in the way of attitudes. So all these feelings, emotional responses, stereotypes that we might hold. So these messages then turn into kind of these attitudes and stereotypes, and that then on the basis of which we then make these rapid fire associations between objects or people and attitudes and stereotypes, right? So we have these, we're getting this information, we are making we hold some attitude stereotypes, and then we put those attitude stereotypes in association with certain categories of people, right? So in his case, he talked about being Asian, right? And as we've already said, which for a lot of those of us who identify as Asian American, we often have more of the positive stereotype, right? The model minority, right? And as Melissa said earlier, whether they are negative or positive, they still cause harm, right? And so in order for us to really understand the biases that we each hold, we have to have access to our mental cloud. We have to know what's in there, right? Because it's happening unconsciously. So that brings us to this idea about decisions and actions. And so in other words, again, repeating this, the constant flow of information that we receive that gets stored in our brains, in our mental cloud, it informs our underlying attitudes, stereotypes, that lead us to make some associations and assumptions. And here's the thing, these associations, unconscious assumptions, associations, impact our decision-making, right? What actions we take, what systems and structures we put in place, what policies we enact, right? Around hiring, or as Melissa, do you go by Melissa or Dr. Moreno?
Melissa.
Okay, thank you. As Melissa mentioned earlier, right? And then Jana was reminding us, right, that these decisions, these actions that we take are either aligned to or they are at odds with our intentions, our values. And the thing is, that doesn't matter because, well, it does matter, but the thing is that those actions that we take, they determine the outcomes we get. And so the outcomes should tell us, they should give us the information, because the outcomes are either serving to interrupt oppression, or our outcomes are further perpetuating it, or they are maintaining the status quo, right? There's no other options. We are either changing something, we are either keeping it the same, or we are making it worse. And so our actions actually give us information about what's going on for me, that I believe one thing, but the outcomes I'm getting are different, right? And so just in summary, again, that's what the slide is. It's just basically, this is what implicit bias is, right? It's this process where we are associating stereotypes, attitudes towards categories of people without conscious awareness, which results in us taking actions that are not aligned with our explicit values, right? And that slide that Jana had shared, where a mind is making, 11 million, was it, Jana? How many on unconscious level? And that the speed of our unconscious mind actually often protects us. The fact is that, yes, it may protect us, but that's also where we can cause harm, right? Because we are unconsciously taking actions, making decisions with knowledge that we actually have not tapped into yet. And so we are going to pause here because we want to give you a moment to reflect. And we want you to think about What is a bias? Now, this is where that courageous vulnerability comes in, right? Like leaning into that, right? Now, what is a bias that you once held or still hold that is not aligned to one of your values? This is where we are asking you to engage in some metacognition and tap into your mental cloud, right? So what is a bias that you once held or still hold that may not be aligned to your values? And how did you realize that you held or hold this bias? Take a moment. You can just silently reflect. You can jot down notes if that helps you. And if anyone wants to share, we welcome it. Again, there's no pressure to do so, but we will hold some space if anybody is moved to share something with us. Would anybody like to share?
I can share.
Yes, thank you, Raul.
So I guess I have a bias to, I would say individuals that are either loud or come into like in a room very loud and with profanities and just not really, minding the rules of conduct in a specific area or room. I get very, I would say, protective of myself and the people that I'm with and wanting to make sure that we're safe. So a bias that I have is sometimes when I see people, again, not, like I said, attending to the norms of where they should be, puts me a little bit uneasy and again, makes me question the character of the individual.
Raul, may I ask a follow-up question?
Absolutely.
Do you have a sense of what the priming is under that?
Probably my upbringing. Grew up in an okay neighborhood, but again, have seen other things in San Francisco and Oakland, and have experienced being in situations where people do act up, and you have to fight or flight sometimes, and stand your own ground.
And in what ways do you feel that it's not aligned to one of your values?
Well, because these people could just be having an absolute grand time, and that's just their way of showing it. It just doesn't align with how I would conduct or carry myself or want any of my family members to carry themselves. But it's just a difference. So it's it's a bias that I know that is very conscious to me, but again, it makes me feel just a little bit uncomfortable. But I am aware of it though.
Thank you for sharing.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate that. I'd love to hear from at least one, and thank you for that vulnerability of just sharing that with all of us here. I'd love to hear from one or two more people, if you feel called.
We also recognize that this is very personal and we are in a public space. So Bay was emphasizing that by saying, there's no pressure, but I just also want to reiterate it that there's, it's okay to not share too, if you'd like to. Mostly invite you to reflect personally.
Right. Yeah. I didn't share this with you, but I used to teach little kids, and one of the things that was drilled into us was wait time. So I have that as part of my identity, is wait time as a teacher. But please don't allow that to pressure you. We just want to hold space. And if that's for you to just reflect, that's totally fine in silence. Silence is great. And if you want to speak, we welcome that as well. So would somebody be willing to read this quote for us, though? Anybody, you can unmute and just read it out for me.
Yeah, I can read it.
Thank you.
We can't avoid mentally absorbing the categories defined by the society in which we live. They permeate the news, television, programming, films, and all aspects of our culture. And because our brains naturally categorize, we are vulnerable to acting on the attitudes those categories represent.
Thank you so much, Irving. Right. So this is right what he's saying, all of everything that he's saying. However, what we can do is what we teach ourselves and what we choose to associate can be up to us, right? And for us to be able to do that, we have to do what Raul did first, right? He tapped into his mental cloud. He became aware of a bias. And once you know that, then we can teach ourselves about, okay, what am I associating here? And what might I need to do? And again, remembering that this is a protective response, right? Because our unconscious mind has taught us to act in certain ways to keep us safe. And we know now that it acts that way even when we might be doing harm, right? And it's again what Yana had shared earlier from the article, that the same thought processes that make people smart can also make them biased, right? For all of us. So we're going to pause here. We've been sitting for a while, so we want to give you a break. Take a break from looking at the computer, get up, stretch your legs, take a few deep belly breaths, get a drink. If you haven't eaten, get something to eat, anything you need for the next 5 minutes. So we'll be back at, my clock says 8:05, but it could be behind. So 8, is that right, Yana? 8:10?
Yeah, let's come back at 8:10, and we'll encourage you to be prompt. So we'll start right at 8:10. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We know that was a really quick break, but we invite you to make your way back. All right, and now we are going to take a moment to talk a little bit about both identity and this idea of unearned advantage and unearned disadvantage. And so we are going to actually watch another short video, and please let me know if you have trouble hearing the sound, or I can't always tell on my end.
Privilege is the unearned advantage we get from being part of a dominant group whose needs have traditionally been prioritized. We can experience privilege because of our gender, race, sexual orientation, ability, class, or other identities. Many of us experience a combination of privilege and disadvantages. For example, white women have privilege because of their race, but are at a disadvantage because of their gender. The privileges we have or don't have can have a big impact on our experiences at work. For example, people without disabilities can usually assume that the software their company uses will work for them. But people with disabilities often have to ask whether a tool is accessible, and if it isn't, they have to ask for an alternative. Or consider religious holidays. Employees who observe a dominant religion's holidays, like Christmas, can generally expect paid time off on those days. But employees who belong to more traditionally marginalized religious communities, such as Muslims, may have to use their vacation days to participate in holiday traditions. It's important to remember that privilege isn't something we earn or choose. Privilege is structural. It exists because our society as a whole prioritizes some groups over others. But while we can't control whether we have privilege, we can become more aware of it. That awareness is crucial. If we don't understand that privilege makes it easier for some people to succeed, we might think the more successful group is just working harder.
Here's an example. In corporate America, for every 100 men who are hired into manager-level positions, only 72 women are hired. This isn't because men are more qualified. Instead, it's largely because men benefit from unearned advantages in the hiring process. One study showed that replacing a woman's name with a man's name on the exact same resume increased the odds of being hired by more than 60%. Similar biases affect people of color, LGBTQ people, and people with other traditionally marginalized identities. In another study, replacing a stereotypically black-sounding name with a stereotypically white-sounding name on a candidate's resume resulted in 50% more callbacks, the equivalent of adding 8 years of work experience. And in the third study, when a candidate had something on their resume that suggested they were LGBTQ, such as belonging to an advocacy group, they received fewer callbacks. Remember, in all these studies, the candidates had the exact same qualifications. Privilege, not effort or ability, gave one group an advantage over another.
These examples show why it's so important to understand how privilege shapes our experiences. When we see why women, people of color, and others with traditionally marginalized identities are underrepresented, we can start to address some of the barriers that hold these groups back. But acknowledging our privilege can be really, really tough. It's uncomfortable to admit that we have an advantage we didn't necessarily earn, especially when we've still had to work hard. But when we do start to see the reality of our own privilege, we can also better understand the experiences of people with less privilege. And we can start to find ways to use our privilege to support and advocate for others. In other words, we can become allies.
We wanted to bring that in, and we're going to layer it in with implicit bias in a moment. But let's just stick with this for a moment. And we wanted to bring in this idea of an identity wheel, or a wheel of power and privilege. And this identity wheel underscores different factors, right, that affect how we both see ourselves and how others see us, whether consciously or not. And we all have these multiple identities, which hold different levels of importance and power in our society. And as a result, they give us a set of unearned advantages or disadvantages based on how much power and importance they hold in society. As the video says, privilege is structural, right? And so as a result, some of us, based on our identities, have more advantages in life, resulting in access to more opportunities, while others, based on our identities, face more disadvantages and have less access to opportunities. And so as we heard in the video, we refer to these as unearned advantages and disadvantages. And these can affect our experiences in our workplaces, in our communities, in terms of just our general life experiences, right? And so we're going to share a couple of examples with you. And so these are some of my identities, right? So I'm an immigrant, and I'm an immigrant and a woman of color, right? And so those two identities, as a result of those, I have definitely experienced some unearned disadvantages, right? But the fact is, I'm also a citizen, right? I'm also a homeowner. I'm a college graduate. I'm a fluent English speaker, right? And those give me unearned advantages, right? And so this idea that as we look at this wheel of power and privilege, there are going to be, as we look at the multiple identities we hold, we will see both of those, right? There are identities for most of us where we benefit from and have some unearned advantages, and also identities as a result of which we face some unearned disadvantages. And we're going to share one more example.
So this one's mine, and we are, we're recognizing that this is a public meeting, and so we're not asking you to do this out loud right now. We're trying to break the ice by doing it ourselves, and we also really want to acknowledge that there are this wheel of power and privilege is limited. It's incomplete in lots of ways. Like, it doesn't have religion, for example, on it, and a number of other identity aspects that may be true for you. But the idea here is we just want to be thinking about the ways that that marginalization happens in our communities, and also that we have intersectional identities, and some of those compound each other in the marginalization, and others give us this nuance of both power and privilege, and also unearned disadvantage in the context as well. And so for me, some of the things that are giving me power in our context are giving me privilege that have been opening doors for me my whole life include that I have light skin. It's a really big one. I have a mixed identity, but often when I am here in California and I walk into a store, I pass as white in lots of different ways. And so that gives me privilege and sometimes power in different contexts. I also have gone to graduate schools. Some of them are well known, and that has opened doors when they're on my resume. I am also a citizen here in the United States, and I was born as a citizen, so that I didn't have to work through our bureaucracy to have that happen. It was given to me at birth. And I also am a Latina. I have invisible disabilities, and I identify as queer. And all of those things in different ways, particularly when they come out in community or when they come out in the workplace, bring up people's biases. And that has marginalized me in different contexts. And so these are examples of both spots of empathy for me, where I empathize with those who have marginalized identities that are similar to mine, and also to some extent, those who have marginalized identities that are different from mine. I have some empathy of what that's like. And I also have some privilege that I could use as power for equity and for justice.
Thank you, Yana, and thank you for actually naming about the some of the things that are missing on the wheel. Thank you. And so I think as we continue to think about this, this idea of privilege as being structural, where society is prioritizing some identities of over others, those of us, right, who are part of dominant groups can hold implicit biases about people who belong to marginalized groups in our society, right? And that's where this intersection of not only the intersectionality of our identities, but also the intersection of our identities and implicit biases comes in, right? And as Yana was saying, we can hold biases towards those who have identities different from us, right? And can go either way, identities that we don't hold. And most of us hold both, as Yana and I just highlighted in our examples, right? And for some of us, you know, of course, we have more than our share of disadvantages, and some have more of the unearned advantages. And so we just want to give you a moment, and as Yana said, this is just for your own reflection. We're not asking anyone to share unless you want to, but just looking at your own identity wheel, what are some of the identities that jump out at you? And they may not be on this wheel, and they are still part of who you are, right? And so just thinking about which ones are awarded power and which ones or marginalized in society. So just take a moment, just either sit with that, jot it down, whatever you want to do. And we'll invite you to do another reflection once you've identified some of your identities.
Can I share something?
Of course.
I had a reflection as I was looking at this, and I think about certainly some of the power and privilege that I see on this wheel, but something that was mentioned earlier is power and privilege that I have within my own marginalized community. As a Pacific Islander with an education, with a good job, with network, with opportunity, and that there's a marginal, I'm on a margin within that margin. So that's just something that came up for me as I was looking at the wheel.
I really, really appreciate that nuanced look at the wheel, right? Like, I think, as, you know, that's something I didn't name, but definitely as I was creating my wheel, I was very aware of that even within my own community, all those things that I named give me power over and some unearned advantages over those within my community who don't have access. And to that, right? So I really appreciate naming that. Thank you, Melissa.
Yeah, I mention it because it gives me a sense of discomfort, because I'd like to think of myself as an empath and mindful of how other people feel when they're around me, but I also recognize that I carry a responsibility in the community that often is heavy.
Yeah, I know. And Yana, you mentioned this, right? Like with advantage, that also comes the responsibility, like you're saying, Melissa, of what does this look like for me to be, whatever word we like. I like to use the word co-conspirator, right? Like, how am I showing up in solidarity, in co-conspiratorship, in allyship with those that may be more on the margins than I am? Right, that there is definitely a sense of responsibility that comes with that. Thank you.
I also, I really heard you naming the discomfort, which is something that often shame arises when we start to look at the inequity that comes from unearned advantage. And in the next section, we'll be thinking about what do we do about this? Because just as we don't choose our unearned disadvantage, we also don't choose often our unearned advantage. We might use it, but we don't choose it, right? And for those of us that are, like you're saying, empaths, or we're thinking, you all are interested in this. This is why you're champions of equity as board members and staff of this community foundation that's doing such tremendous good in the San Bruno community. And so thank you for making a little bit of space for us just to hold that it can get when we start to feel into the inequity. And so I just want to remind us too that we can always take a long breath if that's starting to arise, start to soften the shoulders, start to even open into it, recognizing that it takes a toll on our body, and it has for generations, right? That we're inheriting our parents and our grandparents' pressure and stress from this too. It's a lot to hold.
Yeah. Thank you for that reminder, Yana. And as we invite you to take your own reflection a little deeper, so take a moment as you look at those identities, if you haven't done that already, but what are one or more ways in which you have unearned advantage, privilege, right, in your life? And what might be one or more ways in which you might have unearned disadvantage? And this is also, I mean, Melissa, you're making me also think about this. There's also a continuum of this, right? Like there are some unearned advantages, disadvantages we are born into. And to Yana's point, there is generational trauma that might come with that, right? And for others, maybe we on the continuum where we have them, but we worked really hard and had to go through some stuff to get where we are. Right? And even in all of those, there's still, I hear the piece around the discomfort, right? And then we have, so all the way along, there may be those that there are things that we are just born into and didn't have to do anything to earn them, both advantages, disadvantages, and all the way to the other extreme where, right, that's, yeah, so just wanted to name that nuance also of like, it's a very complex issue of unearned advantage and disadvantage. It's not just a clear-cut answer there, right? So that's why also having some time to just reflect on these for ourselves to get to that. Where we do want to get to, and we want to spend a few minutes, and we actually invite you to engage in a conversation at this part is to really bring this conversation to the organizational level, right? So we want to kind of combine this idea of, as you think about, so here's the point I want to make, that these unearned privileges that we hold as individuals, they are also might show up in our organizations, right? Because organizations are made up of individuals who define a collective culture, right? Especially if we are part of the dominant group in society and in a position of power within the organization. So as you think about your organization now, right, in what ways do you see this idea of unearned advantages, privileges, or unearned disadvantages playing out, maybe in your organization? Yes.
I I mean, the obvious thing, I guess, here is that we have the power of money behind the organization, and we can use the power of money to have impact on those that are less advantaged. And I think that that's sort of a key part of our mission.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. Definitely that the money, right? Huge if we think about power. And I'm going to sit back here. It really, if we want you to have a conversation with each other, anybody wants to build on that idea, add to it, bring in a new idea, how do you see this playing out in your organization?
I think sometimes with boards, not necessarily the foundation, but just generally speaking, the sort of success is measured by whatever an end result might be. And certainly during, COVID, it's been especially hard, I think, for people to be able to be present or participate. So I think sometimes there's a sense of like a few members of the community imposing their will, when in fact there has been so much that is happening in order to welcome the community and to try to affect the broader community's will. So I think the nature of even the term board has it probably attached to it certain perceptions, biases.
Yeah. Thank you. One thing that arises for me is also a lot of the rules and the governance of boards have a legacy that are connected to the cultures of dominant groups here in the United States, right? And that affects our decision-making outcome, like you're sharing, and also the process of getting to that, which I also hear you hinting at, and how that, is affected by, say, the pandemic's context and doing this on Zoom and more. But even back in the kind of old days, pre-COVID, the way that we share time in a board meeting, the formality of it, the language being very centered usually here on English and more, can certainly reflect some of the privilege that those of us as individuals perhaps have when we walk into a board meeting. And then also we might be replicating those and amplifying the privileges or the disadvantage. Absolutely. I really appreciate that point.
Yeah. And we continue to, what I'm going to do is give you another offering, but we really want to get to this piece about, so what do we do about it? We've spent so much time talking about it. So just making a quick connection here to the work that we were doing with implicit bias, and really for you to hold this, and before we move on, just hold this reflection that as you think about these unearned advantages that you've named, organizational advantages, what's an implicit bias that as an organization you might be holding, right? As a result of like the piece around the money, right? The piece that Yana mentioned, the piece that Supriya mentioned. Is there, how do you make decisions about who to allocate your resources to, right? And what priming might have contributed to this? So we're going to offer this to you, and for you to just sit with that and to really hold that. But I'm really going to, at this point, pass it over back to Yana so that we can talk a little bit about what do we do about this.
And Bela, it'd be great to share one more time, and then I'll give you the cue, and we're going to go into that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So much. And knowing that also that our intention here is to offer some seeds for you to continue in future meetings too. And so these could be questions. We'll send you the deck afterwards that perhaps you could even return to. But we're going to jump into this piece of Bela's underscoring of what do we do? So let's hop into that. We're going to have a light touch on growth mindset. But basically the good news is that there are a lot of things that we can do to counteract bias. And where at one point, neuroscientists and others in the scientific community thought that our brains were very static, that after a certain point in our childhood, that the brain didn't grow very much. The concept of neuroplasticity or ongoing healing, growth, and change in the brain is relatively recent. And I think that's terrific news that we're not stuck with what we've got. We're not stuck with our biases. And instead, our brains are really malleable, that they can reconfigure with intention and effort. We can actually continue to grow, to learn, to change throughout our lifetime. And but part of this, so we'll go to the next slide, please. Part of this concept is, again, what the word I just said is neuroplasticity, which is a fancy way of basically saying that the brain continues to grow, right? That we have this ability to reorganize, to build structure, to emphasize certain kinds of thinking, de-emphasize others. We can see this as we learn a new language as adults, where we're able to change our patterns in interpersonal relationships. We're able to improve our leadership skills and more. And now we really know how that happens. So this is there's a few pieces here named in the visual, but the bottom line is that, these neurons, these parts of the brain that are essentially communication cells that send messages to our bodies, our nervous systems, and other parts of the brain, that they can rewire. They can we can have new we even can have new neurons in new parts of the brain. So we can have new ways of thinking. We can strengthen certain areas that have been kind of latent, and then also we can actually de-emphasize areas that, like bias, that we want to let go of. I'll just share on the most personal level. Some of you know that I had a really bad traumatic brain injury. And it has really highlighted for me how neuroplasticity works and how malleable our brains really are, that we can recover from something, from brain injury. But it also has really inspired me to think, what else? For the parts of my brain that are not injured, there's also all these different ways that we can grow. And so that's one big takeaway here with bias, is that we're not stuck with the biases that we have. And one part of getting over our biases is to put some effort in. So the next slide here is to recognize that the concept of growth mindset, which I know some of you are educators. Many of you may be familiar with Carol Dweck's work. She was a Stanford professor and educator and author. And she helped us with this idea that the growth mindset really affects achievement. So here are again, we'll send you the deck, but there are a few different ways that having a growth mindset, or this idea that we can, with effort, improve, rather than a fixed mindset, which is just, we kind of have what we have. I'm either good at sports or I'm not good at sports, would be, a fixed mindset would just be, I'm just not good at it. A growth mindset would be, if I took a tennis lesson or a whole series of them and I practiced every day, I might not be like one of the Williams sisters, but I could certainly improve my capacity and I could enjoy it, and I actually could build skill. And a lot of it is about how we approach tasks. And so we'll go to the next one, please. So these are some of the things that we say to ourselves with a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. So with bias, for example, it might be something like, as I'm encountering my own biases, because I'm a human being and I've been primed and I have all these assumptions, and it's just the brain doing what brains do, is it creates bias. I could have this concept of this recognition will help me grow. With effort, I could change. If I get feedback, it's actually a contribution to me. It's a generous act for someone to give me feedback about my biases or about my bigotry or about microaggressions that I may be committing, for those who had that workshop. Where a fixed mindset, I might respond with defensiveness of, especially if I have this binary thinking of I'm either biased or unbiased, I'm either good at it or I'm not good at it, then I could get real stuck thinking, if Bela kind of calls me in or calls me out about a bias I have, I might respond with some defensiveness if I have a fixed mindset. But if I have this idea of I'm an ongoing learner, throughout my life, I'm going to improve and put effort in, my brain structure could change and my biases could lessen. So that's the good news. But all of that is just how I think about it, right? We really want to get into actually what the action would be. And so that's the next thing we'll look at. So the bottom line is that we can do a lot. On an individual level, as my own personal reflection, and how I think inside can change. Also, how I interact with others on an interpersonal level also could certainly improve. And then on an organizational level, and the organizations that I contribute to, that I, for example, as a contributor to the San Bruno Community Foundation, there's a lot that y'all could do to recognize, interrupt, and to shift biases. And so we sent you a link in the packet, and I'd like to just share my screen and give you a little glimpse at a document that you could come back to. And so this is a working document that y'all could add to. It's just a Google Doc, but basically it has some concrete ideas. So this is just an orientation to the document that you could visit again, but some concrete ideas about what you could do on an individual level. So everything from examining your language, taking this implicit association test. We're including it here as a resource, and I also really encourage you to read the critique of it. It can actually be quite helpful, I think, both to take it and to do the reflect on its limits. But there's a lot that we can do on an individual personal level. There's also plenty we could do on an interpersonal level. And again, for those who received and partnered up with me on the microaggressions workshop, there's things that we talked about there. For example, this calling out, calling in has sentence structures that we could use when we're interacting with others. Even just the concept of making new friends actually does all kinds of great things to our brains when we interact with people who are different from us. And we get into that neuroplastic zone of growth. And so having exposure to new people and having interpersonal connections with them can actually interrupt some of our biases, and many other ideas here. And then at an organizational level, there's a lot you could do. Everything from doing equity audits and this like assessing and evaluating piece, this sort of thing, of having workshops and then building on it into your future meetings, thinking about hiring and more. So this is just and again, it's an incomplete document with the intention that potentially you could add to it. And also it has lots of links at the bottom. And so this was informed by some of these sources. And so if you'd like to link and or visit any of these links, and then also potentially build to it, as if you find something new and you want to add to your organization's list, this is just a tool. And so you can visit it later. We're not going to put it in the chat for the public access piece, but it's in your packet. And we'll go back to the thanks, Bela, for giving me the chance. We're tag teaming here, sharing the screen. So thank you for that. So we'll go to skip to the next one, please. And so again, thinking about the power and the privileges that we hold, one terrific way of kind of handling the discomfort and the shame or the pain, the hurt that we have when we start to recognize both areas of marginalization and also the flip of areas that we have power within our communities and also across community. I think one of the most productive ways, in addition to just acknowledging it, can be to use that discomfort for change. And so we'll go to the next slide. This one, and feel free to just to click them all, Bela, thank you. So this is this concept of that within the foundation, y'all could spend your unearned advantage, right? If we're thinking about, none of us, most of us anyway, didn't choose our privileges. In fact, a lot of them would kind of like to give back. I would, I'd like to share it. I wish it was like a community bank account that we could just, or, some sort of micro lending that we could give out, some of our power. And in some ways it actually is that way, that we can't erase the context and, completely, or at least not as quickly as we would like to do, to wave a wand and make it better, but we could certainly use our privilege as though it's some sort of capital, it's social capital that we can use. And here are some of the ideas that you could do in the foundation, right? If you, as individuals and also as the foundation itself, to use some of your unearned advantage. They are, this again is a not exhaustive list. So Melissa, thanks for naming in the earlier, kind of glaring privilege that the organization has about having money, right? And getting to choose how to use that money in the community is incredible power. And so I know that you're already doing this, but continuing to think about how are those decisions made? What kind of information informs your decisions as individuals and other bodies and committees within the foundation that have that privilege and power? Who are those people? How do they reflect on their biases? What sort of structure in the meetings supports those decisions? Those can all, be really fruitful. It also could be, really thinking about how being active followers. What are the venues to do that as individuals or as an organization? What are the ways that we speak up when we start to feel that discomfort in the room? How do we call out and call in, again, using that Tufts tool that we did in the other workshops, and that is in that tool that I was just referencing. Thinking about how do we listen, both in an interpersonal level, on an organizational level, and more. And so you all have been selected and invited to be in your roles in the organization for terrific reason. Even just getting to work in, kind of in depth with 5 of you, I've been so touched by your thoughtfulness and your kindness and your dedication. And I'm really confident that those who I didn't get to do the individual sessions with, you all also have a wealth of experience that you're bringing to the table. And so the invitation here is just to think about, how do you spend the unearned advantage that you have? Knowing that regardless, almost all of us have some aspects, like Melissa, thank you for sharing about, even within our ethnic or cultural or racial groups that may be marginalized, we often may have power within that because of our gender, because of our sexual orientation, because of our age, because of our abilities, and more. So the idea here is that we actually, whoever we are, we have unearned advantage that we could spend. And so I'd like to just pause here, knowing that this would be a much longer conversation that y'all could have about how do you do this structurally. But would like to open it up if anyone feels inspired right now of something that either is a topic that you'd like to think more about, or maybe you have an idea. Maybe you visited that document that I just flashed on the screen. There is a link in your packet, and you thought, hey, I could do that. Or maybe I'm already doing it and I really want to do, I want to take it to the next level. So just invite you to share any hope or inspiration that you have. Also, perhaps for those who did the microaggression workshops, if anything stuck with you, again, we talked a lot about the how we could interrupt and how we could make amends in those workshops, so that sometimes our privilege enables us to do that. It gives us that safety and willingness and time and capacity that's needed to do those things. So feel free to reference back that way too. What could you do?
I think requiring the training, in your in my own different roles. I've had implicit bias training as a prosecutor when I was working in that role, having the training in this role. I think the fact that I'm seeing that it's occurring more and at different levels and throughout organizations, it gives me hope for myself that I'm being given the opportunity to revisit this learning at various points and in different contexts. So I think that is something that is that creates hope for me.
Yeah, thank you. Something that arises for me when I hear you say that is also my experience with you and with colleagues who have had previous trainings, and now we're getting to interact in this context together, is the power of your both experience, but also your humility of recognizing that, like, that beginner's mind of thinking like I'm still learning, that it's very it's neuroplasticity in action, right? That I'm continuing to learn. And so that's not on the list here, but it certainly is. Again, what we could add to it is training, learning together. Yeah, absolutely.
I have something to throw in here, if I may.
Please.
It's probably not a day goes by that I think how wonderful this foundation is and the good work we're doing, but where it came from and the horrible tragedy we all experienced almost 13 years ago. And it's forced me anyway to be very humble in accepting the charge that people gave me and all of us in overseeing this hybrid of a foundation where we don't have to go get money. It was there. And I think we spend a lot of additional special time to make sure that we take care of the people that this money goes to, the ethnicity of the people, the financial ability or inability of the people, all of the things that were brought up tonight. So I think for me, it's important to see where we were. And I've always said that something good has to come out of what we experienced. And this is part of it. So thank you.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Jim. And it really does highlight actually one aspect of unearned advantage that came from tragedy, but that is an unearned advantage that the foundation has. And you just said it, that you don't have to fundraise for this money, right? That it's not, sometimes organizations that are funding organizations have to keep cultivating the funds, and that takes time and energy. And so because you don't have to do that, you could actually use that time and energy to think about your decision-making processes and the thoughtfulness of how the money will be distributed and who is going to get it. All of that, there may be actually the advantage of time, which is huge. Yeah, it's terrific. Melissa, I just saw that your mute went off.
Yeah, so I have a couple of thoughts. I mean, obviously we're a public board and there's a political aspect to this work, and there's some political influence on this board. And so the thoughts I'm having is I feel like we have done a great service to the community, and we have been very mindful, but we could put some words together about making that part of our priority is looking at the awarding of funds being more intentional or thoughtful about looking through an equity lens. Just a thought.
Yeah. Great. Again, so tangible, right? Bela, please.
No, finish your thought, Yana.
No, I'm done. Go for it.
Yeah. No, I love that idea. And actually, one of the things I was going to say was bring back something we talked about earlier and connected here, is that when we were talking about implicit bias, and that it can often be at times not be in alignment with our individual values. The thing is that the organizations also have values, right? We often have org values, and so that's another way to look at, like, what are our org values and are we actually living those values in the way that we are making decisions, in the way we are spending our resources, and right? So that's just another lens through which to look at it as well.
Great. Thank you for those tangible ways. I'm wondering if, and this again is just an invitation, if there's anyone who hasn't shared yet tonight that you'd like to, and you have an idea here about a way that you could spend some of the advantage as an individual or as an organization. No pressure. Oh, Arvin, I see you. Go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Yana. Well, I had a comment, I guess, from the previous question, but maybe hopefully my comment will tie to the question you're asking. I guess the question in terms of just organization and looking at how implementation and decisions are made in the context of institutions that have set up, bylaws or policies. And I think about not just the foundation, but in other organizations I participate in, and how those conversations are really hard to have, and conversations that most folks, well, I guess not maybe most folks, but just it's hard conversations to have for a number of reasons. And so I guess that's the comment I wanted to just make of, when thinking about like ways to improve and negating or removing implicit bias, how there's sometimes constraints with institutions that have set forth policies or bylaws that it's really hard to, I guess, to try to, I guess, address those issues of implicit bias.
Yeah, really hard, as you're saying, really hard. And also those who have power and advantage within the organization could be actors of that change, right? If there was any policy change or wording change, or Melissa, as you're saying, like direction setting, board members and executives within an organization, if anyone has some room to change the ethos or the processes, there's potential there, right? And then certainly within the organizations and the political structures that you all are connected to, they're big entities that have history. And so yes, very slow moving in lots of ways and hard to change. And also those with power and privilege from the inside often could be the actors of the change. And often the action is quite tangibly small, right? It's in the way we listen, it's in the way we advocate, it's in the way we follow, it's in the way we make decisions, it's in the way that the bylaws of the meetings are constructed and more. Yeah, and recognizing their limitations, right? Like the Brown Act, for example, is something that's handed to you rather than something that you're co-creating here. Absolutely. As we begin to wrap up, oh, Bela, please.
I'm just going to reiterate what you just said, because it's so important, I think, in the work that even I do, that sometimes we think that the change that we need to make has to be this huge thing we have to do and turn everything over and around. And sometimes it's that small change, right? That's where we start and we learn from it, and then we implement something else, and then we learn from that. It's the design process, basically. You're iterating on these small little actions, and then that eventually can get us to an outcome that's really different. But it doesn't have to be overnight, like this huge thing that needs to happen. So I just want to, I'm glad you made that point, Yana. Thank you.
Helpful. Thank you. So we'll pop to the next slide. And this one is actually an invitation for you to do in the future. And so potentially either as, an upcoming meeting or just as an individual, again, the bias interruptions document could be a working document that you all contribute to. And you could identify at least one strategy at each level that you commit to practicing. Maybe it's new, maybe it's one that you've been doing for a while and you're just going to enhance your skills. And And then there are also resources within that are just a launching pad, right? It's just a starting place. After this meeting, I'll also make sure that collaborate with Leslie to make sure that you all get a document that those who did the microaggressions workshop saw after your self-assessment, that have these tools from Harvard that are based on building our fluency in knowledge and terms, and also questioning and working with some of our beliefs relating to racism and other biases. And so we'll send those out too. So if you weren't in one of those workshops, you'll get a little bit of the resources. And we'll end tonight with the invitation for you to think about what's sticking out from our session today. And this could just be one word. It could be something like shame. It could be inspiration. It could be discomfort. It could be new learning, whatever is true for you. Maybe there's a sense of community. I feel connected after hearing some of your personal reflections. So just think about what's sticking out for you. And then if anyone feels moved to share, you're welcome to. But this is how we'll end tonight.
Start on empathy.
Thanks. Pac, did I see yours go off too?
Yeah, I was thinking humility. I know you mentioned it during our microaggression, but I think that's a key thing, especially with implicit bias.
Huge. Yeah. So empathy, humility. Anyone else want to share what's on your mind? What's sticking with you?
I loved the bank, the analogy of having a bank of unearned privilege that we can spend. It's a great way to think about that. Thank you.
Back to basics.
Back to basics. Thanks, Jim.
Continuum.
Last opportunity, if there's anything burning that you would like to share, certainly appreciate you.
Sorry, I didn't know you were talking to me, Yana. I just want to say I'm really honored and grateful to be here today. So thank you. Thank you for having me here today.
Ditto. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to get to work with you. Some of you in the microaggressions individual workshops, and then also in this board session. So it was great for Bayla and I to get to team up with you. Thank you, Leslie, especially, and Melissa for thought partnering and helping us co-create this, and then also giving us the opportunity. So I appreciate your time tonight. I think we're right at the 2-hour window, and so we'll close unless Melissa or Leslie, is there anything else that you would like to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just want to thank Yana and Bayla for our training this evening and for the work that you did prior to this evening's meeting. But very quickly, is there anyone in the public, if there are any questions or comments?
We don't have any public attendees right now.
Okay, great. So we'll kind of shift into item number 5. And if there are any comments any board members would like to make. No? Okay, I do. I always do, but I just want to quickly apologize to Bayla. I mispronounced your name earlier, and I didn't ask if it was correct, and so I apologize. And so when I heard Yana, I quickly adjusted, so I want to just apologize about that. And also just want to thank Yana earlier for being so vulnerable and sharing her identity wheel and sharing a little bit about the stories about that. So always empowering to hear other people's stories. It kind of lifts me up to share mine. So I just want to thank you, Yana, for modeling this work. So thank you. Anything else from anyone? Oh. Okay, so we will move to item number 6. May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
I'll second.
Great. And so thank you very much. We are adjourned, and our next regular meeting will be held on Wednesday, this Wednesday, the 1st at 7 p.m. on Zoom. And also just want to acknowledge Heather, who's here with us this evening. Thank you so much, Heather, for being with us. Okay, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank
Good
you.
night. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.